WashingTECH Policy Podcast, episode number 3.
Moving the needle. Welcome to the WashingTECH Policy Podcast.
Curating communications, media, and tech policy news so you don't have to. News, interviews, everything you need without the axe to grind. It's the WashingTECH Policy Podcast with Joe Miller.
The DOJ drops espionage charges against a Temple professor. The U.S. and EU agree to share data, and the FCC establishes a hot clock for Charter and Time Warner Cable. The House passed legislation last Tuesday entitled the E-Warranty Act, which would allow electronic device makers to issue warranty information electronically. Currently, device makers are required to issue warranty information via print. Of the 309 representatives who voted, just 2 opposed: Michigan Republican Representative Dr. Dan Benishek and North Carolina Republican Walter Jones, Jr. The next step is President Obama's desk for signature. The Justice Department has dropped its economic espionage charges against Temple University professor and physics department chair Chi Ching. Chi was originally charged with wire fraud and attempting to share competitive information about a semiconductor company with China. The U.S. and EU have agreed to a data sharing agreement despite a strained relationship following the Ed Snowden leaks. Under the agreement, EU citizens would have the right to sue in the U.S. if their personal data is misused. But Congress would have to pass a law first, and the Judicial Redress Act, co-sponsored by Connecticut Republican Chris Murphy and Senate Finance Committee Chairman Republican Orrin Hatch, seeks to do just that. The FCC has established its shot clock for its review of the Charter-Time Warner Cable merger. Comments are due October 13th. Reply comments are due on November 2nd. The FCC is coming down on Lyft, the car-sharing service, for its robocalls. Users are currently unable to use Lyft's services without giving automatic consent to receive robocalls. The FCC warned Lyft that the policy violates the Telephone Consumer Protection Act because there is no genuine opt-out. The FAA is supposed to pass regulations by September 30th, which would pave the way for commercial drone use, but it looks like the agency is going to miss the deadline. And at a House Judiciary Committee subcommittee hearing last Thursday, California Republican Representative Darrell Issa said the FAA's delay is a punt. New York Democratic Representative Jerry Nadler said addressing the safety of drones will take time, as will the appropriate distinction between the FCC's authority to regulate drone transmissions and the FAA's authority to regulate airspace. Jesse Jackson Sr. is expanding his efforts to improve diversity and inclusion in the tech sector by focusing now on so-called unicorn startups, those worth $1 billion or more. Few of these companies have released their diversity statistics. Tech and auto companies have come together with a proposal to share the 5.9 gigahertz band. The FCC would bear the burden of addressing any signal interference. At an American Enterprise Institute event, FCC Republican Commissioner Ajit Pai said the FCC's net neutrality order has reduced investment in telecom. Our guest is Rob Atkinson, founder and president of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, ITIF. Robert Atkinson leads a prolific team of policy analysts and fellows that is successfully shaping debate and setting the agenda on a host of critical issues at the intersection of technological innovation and public policy. He is an internationally recognized scholar and a widely published author whom the New Republic has named one of the 3 most important thinkers about innovation. Washingtonian magazine has called Rob a tech titan, and Government Technology magazine has judged Rob to be one of the top 25 doers, dreamers, and drivers of information technology. A sought-after speaker and valued advisor to policymakers around the world, Atkinson's books include Innovation Economics, The Race for Global Advantage, Supply-Side Follies, Why Conservative Economics Fails, Liberal Economics Falters, and Innovation Economics is the Answer. and the past and future of America's economy, long waves of innovation that power cycles of growth. He has also conducted groundbreaking research projects and authored hundreds of articles and reports on technology and innovation-related topics, ranging from tax policy to advanced manufacturing, productivity, and global competitiveness. President Clinton has appointed Atkinson to be on the Commission on Workers, Communities, and Economic Change. The Obama administration appointed him to the National Innovation and Competitiveness Strategy Advisory Board. And he now serves as co-chair of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy's China-U.S. Innovation Policy Experts Group. Just a brilliant scholar, a prolific scholar, and I'm so glad to have him on the show. Why do all the Democratic task forces you're a member of all sound more exciting than the Republican one?
Just lucky, I guess. I don't know.
A little jab here and there doesn't hurt. Yeah. Okay. So we're here today to talk about tech and jobs. What, in your view, Rob, are the most important issues when we're talking about the role of tech in job creation, or as some would have it, job elimination?
Well, Joe, I think there's been a really sort of dangerous meme that's come about in the last couple of years, and it really has become quite widespread. And it's this notion that technology is this massive destroyer of jobs, and that we're accelerating the rate of the pace of innovation so rapidly, 3D printing and intelligent systems and robots and the like, that it's just going to be the pace will be killing jobs much faster than we can create jobs. I really fundamentally reject that view, and there are a number of reasons why. There's a report we wrote about a year and a half ago called "Robots, Do They Make or Take Jobs?" And what we did is we looked at all of the economic evidence from economists who've looked at the relationship between productivity, which is really what we're talking about. Here's technology drives productivity, and job growth. What they found was that there's none, essentially. High periods of high productivity, if anything, are associated with stronger job growth than the opposite. It's the same thing with historical periods. McKinsey Global Institute did a study where they looked at job growth and productivity. And again, they found that almost all the periods of job growth were followed by productivity were followed by job growth. So I just really am not that worried about it. And the fundamental mistake people make when they sort of make that kind of intuitive leap, well, automation or productivity or robot is killing this job, therefore the job is going to be gone. This is what economists call the lump of labor fallacy. Here's the problem with that is what happens when somebody automates something, whether it's ticket takers at airports or whether it's taxi drivers or whatever. Those things cost less. They're cheaper because you don't have to have as much labor in them, and so the price goes down. And what do we all do with that money we save? So we save $5 here and there and $10 here. We don't put it in a mattress. We spend it. We invest it. And that in and of itself creates other jobs. So I think the big issue with tech and jobs is not whether there are going to be fewer jobs. I've actually challenged a number of the sort of Luddite folks who think that tech is going to kill jobs. I've challenged them to what's called a long now bet. And the Long Now Foundation lets you do these bets over 10 years. No one's ever taken me up on that. So if any of your listeners want to do that, I'm happy to do that. And the bet is essentially that the unemployment rate in 2025 is going to be pretty similar to the unemployment rate today. What will be different, though, and this is, I think, the real issue we should be focusing on, is it's that, folks do get disrupted from their jobs. There are going to be different kinds of jobs. There are going to be different occupations. That's what we really got to do a lot better job of preparing people for that. We do a terrible job in the U.S. of helping people transition when they lose a job to a new job. That's the issue, not overall levels of joblessness.
And that kind of ties into a blog post I saw you in Christian Science Monitor. I think what you said was that contrary to what a lot of people think, the U.S. is actually sixth in robots and manufacturing, with China, and China's actually first.
Yeah. Pretty amazing.
So if the U.S. ranked first, would that change your opinion of the effect of robots on jobs?
No, it's actually, if you look at the countries that have more robots than we do in manufacturing, they have more manufacturing jobs as a share of their economy than we do. It's just, again, it's just the opposite of what people think. if one of the reasons we've lost so many jobs to China is because our productivity hasn't been high enough. And if we had higher productivity through robots, we wouldn't be offshoring so many jobs to China. That's for you look at the Germans, for example. You know, they're just doing great on manufacturing. They run a trade surplus with China. Their manufacturing wages are about 40% higher than our manufacturing wages. How do they do that? They have really high productivity, and so they're able to gain global market share. So I think if we had more robots in our manufacturing, we wouldn't have any fewer jobs. But what we'd have would be higher wage jobs, because there's a complementarity between the technology that you'd have to have robots or advanced automation and the kinds of skills the workers need to operate them.
So higher wage jobs in terms of design type jobs? No,
that's a good point, Joe. It'd really be both. Number one is I think our overall manufacturing would be stronger, and so we'd have more design and sales and marketing and all of those sort of jobs that are not on the shop floor. But we'd have higher wage jobs on the shop floor. One of the things that's interesting that very few people know is our manufacturing sector is actually lower tech than the Japanese and the Germans in terms of the kinds of industries that we have jobs in. The Germans, the Japanese have much more manufacturing jobs in high-tech sectors, like machine tools, cars, semiconductors, things like that. Altogether, we have fewer. And I think if we had more robotics, again, to be able to work in a factory that's pretty automated and has robots and other kinds of advanced IT-based equipment, you have to have higher skills as a worker, and so you have to pay the worker more money and you have to train them more. So I think it would be a win-win.
And so now, in terms of overall innovation, what do you think are going to be America's key challenges aside from manufacturing? Do you see us being, the inventors, or do you see China, stepping in to take over that role and us shifting more to sort of a manufacturing type of economy?
Well, I think one of the real problems with the debate about where is the U.S. economy and how well is it doing on innovation. We have two biases. One is whenever anybody ever asks that question, immediately in their mind they think of Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is an amazing place. It's almost anomalous compared to how well it's doing compared to the rest of the world, compared to the rest of the U.S. But the U.S. is a big, big country. We cannot we cannot build our entire economy on Silicon Valley. We've got to have innovation hubs in many, many regions of our country that are performing very, very well. Secondly, the other bias in trying to come up with an objective assessment of sort of how do we stand on innovation compared to other countries is we're just so big. Now, when you look at it sort of pound for pound or per GDP, innovation per GDP, there are a lot of countries that are doing better than we are. Sweden, Finland, even perhaps Korea now, Taiwan. So our big challenges, first of all, we still do quite well in innovation, and there's a bunch of reasons for that. One of the reasons is we had such a big lead over other countries, and that lead sort of helped reinforce itself. But that lead is slowly eroding. Second, here's some examples of how it's eroding. We rank now 22nd in the world in funding our university research. So, we have great universities, but other countries are putting a lot more money into building up their research system universities and funding scientists and engineers. We rank 27th in the world now in our research and development tax credit. That's why R&D in the U.S. is growing about 2.5 times faster overseas. Corporate R&D is growing 2.5 times faster overseas than corporate R&D is in the U.S., U.S. corporate R&D. We have a real problem with STEM education, science, engineering, math. We're not producing enough of those talented degrees to fuel our economy. We got problems with our tax code. We got problems with regulation. We still have strength, but the real risk for the U.S. is a little bit like that great commercial from the 70s. We're Avis, we try harder. The U.S. thinks it hurts. We're number one. We can just sit back. It doesn't really matter. And other countries don't think that way. So I'm very optimistic and bullish on the United States, but only if we really get our act together and and start doing the things that Washington needs to do to get innovation in a much stronger position.
So it's interesting what you said about the tax code. What are the specific things about the tax code you think? What are some of the incentives that we create for other countries, or that we create for revenues overseas as opposed to revenues here? How does that work? Do you have any insights on that?
Yeah, so there's sort of three components of that. There's sort of incentives to invest here. There's the overall rate, and there's this question of how you tax how you tax global revenues for multinationals. So on the first one, which is incentives, we really don't do a very good job. Back when Clinton was in office, we had the most generous research and development tax credit in the world, and now we're 27th at least, because other countries are wanting to incent their companies to do R&D or to actually relocate R&D from other places. Another big innovation that a bunch of countries now have done, and we don't, is creating what's called collaborative research and development tax credits, giving you a super bonus credit if you fund research at a university or a national lab, a federal laboratory. This is a really important way to build innovation ecosystems, build innovation partnerships, get government labs, universities working with industry, big and small. Our R&D credit actually penalizes companies for doing that. It gives them a less of a generous credit than if they just did it inside. But 7 or 8 countries now have what are called patent boxes, where you get a lower corporate rate on income from innovation or patents, depending on how it's defined. So, and lastly, we invest in this country. Our companies are investing about 35% less in training their workers than a decade ago. They're investing about 30% less in new machinery and equipment than 3 decades ago. And one of the reasons for that, because we don't give any incentives for companies to invest in training their frontline workers. Other countries do. We don't give any tax incentives for investing. We give weak tax incentives compared to other countries for investing in a new piece of machinery or a computer-aided design program. So we don't do well there. On the corporate rate, we have essentially the highest rate in the OECD at 35%. And then finally, we have the question of territoriality. And there's a lot of debate about that. Essentially, this is the notion that if you make profits in another country, if you're a U.S. multinational, you get that taxed at 35% in the U.S., even though you might get taxed at, say, 10% in another country. But you can defer that tax if you keep the money overseas. One side says, no end deferral, that way they won't go overseas. Another side says, basically let them bring the money back at a lower rate. There's a whole set of debate about that. I think the fundamental problem is just our rate is too high. And I think what we've proposed is, look, we got to fundamentally raise individual rates. We should be taxing dividends and capital income as normal income. We should be taxing carried interest for these Wall Street VC types at normal rates. Use some of that money to build these incentives for investing in the future.
So now, immigration reform. Congress has been going back and forth on immigration reform for a couple of years now, I guess, on the need for immigration reform. And some say we should raise the cap on H-1B visas. And for those who don't know, these are the visas granted to highly skilled workers who live abroad but come to work in the U.S. And there's a cap on the number of H-1B visas that can be issued each year. It's 65,000 or somewhere around there. Yep. What are the key issues we need to be focused on when it comes to the effect of H-1B visas on American workers?
So the whole question of H-1B visas is something that's highly contentious, obviously. And there's one side that essentially says it's a plot by companies to undercut the wages of American STEM workers, science, technology, engineering, and math workers. And I don't really believe that's the case. There's a number of studies on the wages of H-1B visa workers. Some of them say their wages are actually higher than American workers. Some of them say they're a little bit lower. Some say they're the same. I think the question on H-1B visas is really twofold. One, I think we should expand the visas, but secondly, we should enforce the rules that you can't use it to displace American workers. You can't use them to, you have to pay, prevailing wages. I think that all makes sense. But I think it's part of a broader question, which is, do we need more high-skill science and engineering workers in the U.S.? And I believe we do. And I think one of the things we should do is, part of the problem with the immigration debate is that, and particularly some in Congress have held up high-skill immigration for trying to do comprehensive immigration. Comprehensive immigration is not looking very positive right now. And I think it's just time to say, look, it's too important, high skill's too important, let's get a high skill bill done. One of the things we could do and should do there is to expand the visas, expand the ability to, if you're a scientist coming here and getting a PhD at MIT and you're from another country, you ought to be able to get a green card immediately and stay in this country and work. And there's several bills in the Congress that would allow that to happen. But finally, I think the other part of this is we need to do a better job of ensuring that more kids in America are going into science and engineering disciplines and degrees. And the real lot of problems why they don't, the inadequate teaching in high schools. We should be creating at least 200 or 300 more specialty math and science high schools, including in disadvantaged neighborhoods and disadvantaged communities. These schools can really make a big difference in kids' lives. Couple them with programs like First Robotics, where you're getting hands-on engineering experience. We need to do a better job in colleges of giving incentives to colleges to actually turn out more scientists and engineers. They actually weed out these folks. They have a policy, some of the schools, where they just say we're gonna force kids out of engineering or science, even though they're just as the ones who get forced out are just as good. So I think there's a lot we can and should do because this is a pretty important talent set for our future.
So I'm going to change the subject slightly. Because I'm fascinated by the idea. I don't know how much of a futurist you are, but as many science fiction enthusiasts are interested in this topic, the notion of robots and computers actually surpassing human intelligence. Ray Kurzweil talks about it as being singularity, the moment when a new species, essentially humans merged with machines, emerges to replace humans. And it sounds almost, it sounds crazy. So how far-fetched do you think? How far-fetched do you think that notion is? Do you think we're on the? How do you agree with Kurzweil? Do you think we're on the verge of human extinction, basically?
So there's two issues with Kurzweil. First of all, no, I fundamentally disagree with Kurzweil, and it really boils down to two questions. One question is what's called Moore's law going to continue? This is the notion of Gordon Moore, founder of Intel, had that essentially processing power doubles for chips for semiconductors every 18 to 24 months, and so that's been going on now for a long, long time, and it's been this incredible driver of innovation. I read an article the other day that said that 8 trillion transistors were created every second last year. 8 trillion a second globally. Unbelievable. What Kurzweil does, though, which I think is a huge mistake, is he projects the doubling on for another 25 years. That is not going to happen. It just simply won't happen. And the reason it won't happen is that the physics of essentially Moore's law are coming closer to an end. And again, highly controversial. A lot of people who say, well, that's been said before and it never happened. I think it actually is going to happen this time. Then the question is there going to be a replacement for what's called CMOS, the current silicon architecture? And that could be what people call, or what people are terming quantum computing, other types of breakthroughs in computing. We're a long, long way away from that. I mean, we're sort of, I think, compared to where we were in computing, we're sort of in the 60s. We could see computers, but they were a long way away from really being commercially viable. And I think quantum is like that. So I don't think we should even worry about this question for another 25 years. But secondly, what Kurzweil says is even, once we get to this quote, machines being, sort of smarter than humans, that they will inherently be more powerful and take over human beings. And some people, including Elon Musk and others, have warned that, this could be the end of the human race. I think this is a really, really dangerous notion. I mean, like super dangerous notion, because the human race progressed for the one fundamental reason is we embraced innovation and risk, and we said, you know what, we're going to do it this way, even though nobody's ever done it before this way. It's going to be better for us. And if we start fearing that any time scientists are advancing AI or artificial intelligence systems, that we better put a brake on that, or we shouldn't fund it. We should cut funding from NSF or other kinds of federal programs for this. That is going to be a major, major slowdown in innovation. So I think it's a lot of hype, frankly. We're 25 years away at minimum, I think, before we should even worry about machines that we can't control. And by the way, I don't even think that's ever going to be a problem. But there's no point in even thinking about it now. It's like, we can't even get. There's a website where you can go on, and I forget what it is. My daughter showed it to me. You take a picture, and it tells you how old you are, and it's vastly inaccurate.
But it's kind of fun to think about in a weird, sort of morbid way. Anyway. We'll leave that.
No, it is. But it's one of those things that people. Yeah, it is fun to think about. People think, oh, this is really, really interesting. And we see it in the movies. Terminator 9 or whatever is coming out this summer, and we're all going to freak out. But I think we should all just take a deep breath and say, you know what, we want more AI. We don't want less of it.
Yeah. So now, Rob, you are one of them. We're going to get off the policy here, and thank you so much. Your insights are incredible. But I want to ask you a question. You are one of the most productive people in this town. It's really commendable how much you get published, how much you do. Can you share some tips? Can you share some of the tools you use and how you use them for folks who want to be more productive, who want to get more done?
Well, thank you for saying that, Joe. It's very, very nice of you to say. I don't know. I think, a couple of things. I tend to be pretty brutal when it comes to email. I just blow through email pretty quickly, and I have a whole bunch of different email file stuff that I don't have to look at till maybe I have some time on an airplane, stuff I can look at later in the week, stuff I've got to look at today. Everything gets filed and done that way. We don't have a lot of meetings. I think for a few days or about a week, I had a little spreadsheet. And every 15 minutes, I would calculate what I did for that 15 minutes, had it in about 10 different categories just to see how was I spending my time. And I did it for a week. I don't do it every day. I did it for a week just to see, for a week of my time, what do I spend my time on? Is it email? Is it writing? Is it meetings?
So basically, just to kind of give you a snapshot.
Yeah, snapshot of kind of my time allocation, and I ended up finding out that I'm spending I thought too much time in meetings, and so we've tried to cut that back some. But I think the main thing really, I'd say one of the things. I think the main thing is really for me, it's just shutting the door, putting the phone on do not disturb, and it's basically saying, okay, I'm going to spend 90 minutes here, and I'm just going to crank out for 90 minutes, and at the end of 90 minutes, see what I've got. And to me, that's the only way to get anything done anymore, because the distractions are just so great. So I've got a sign I can put on my door. People know not to disturb me, and so if I can sort of carve out little spots like that, it's easier to get things done.
It's the donuts in the pantry that always get me.
Yeah, no, tell me about it. There's that. There's just a million distractions, and I think part of it is my wife tells me I have a personality that can just sort of tune things out, which is good and bad. But I do think that that's part of it. It really is about it's just about being able to tune out a lot of things and just set up a space and say, this is what I'm doing right now, and I'm not doing anything else.
And that's kind of what Chris Brogan says a lot about, just taking the time to. Jonathan Fields also talks about just working in spurts and then taking those much-needed breaks, and ultimately you end up getting much more done.
Yeah, and a lot of it is, frankly, I think, is it's hard. You can't do that 8 hours a day, at least most people, because it's just too draining. But if you can tell your mind psychologically, look, I'm only going to have to do this for an hour, or whatever it is that you can do it. It's I'm just going to do it for this period of time, and I'm just going to sprint. I'm just going to focus and work. And then when it's over, hey, I can go get a donut. It becomes a lot easier to do at that point, I think.
Dr. Atkinson, thanks so much for being here.
Joe, thank you. And wonderful podcast. I listen to it regularly.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you.
Okay.
Rob Atkinson, brilliant guy, great conversationalist. We even started talking about donuts. I'd like one right now, actually. But before I do, I want to invite you to reach out. Email me anytime at jmiller@washingtech.com. I do respond to emails, and I want to hear from you. That concludes episode number 3.
Thanks for listening to the WashingTECH Policy Podcast. You've been briefed.